Hi, you're listening to the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. I'm your host, Jill Perrick, a life and success coach who specializes in helping working professionals and entrepreneurs overcome imposter syndrome. If you feel like you're not as smart, capable, or worthy as you actually are, and that someone is going to find you out, you've come to the right place. I use social and cognitive psychology, neurolinguistic programming, and somatic healing to take my clients from imposter to empowered so they can go after the success that they want and feel worthy of it too. Let's dig in. Hello to my fraud squad. Welcome back to the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. I'm your host, Jill Perrick, and you can find me on Instagram at YourCoachJill. And I am so excited to be talking to you about the fear of judgment today. Now, I wanted to talk about specifically if you are neurodivergent and you have an online business, or even if you just work full-time and you have a job where you have to show up and do presentations or talk in meetings or do projects, the fear of judgment can be very exasperated by your neurodivergent brain. And there's two reasons for this. The first one is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and this is when you are more sensitive or fearful of criticism or rejection. So you're more aware that you could be rejected or you could fail. You really take criticism or constructive feedback personally, and you really hyper focus on it. The hyper focusing part of having ADHD or being neurodivergent in some way doesn't help at all, because if you're getting information about yourself and it's not great, or you don't categorize it as good, then you may hyperfixate on it. So that's where that comes in. And then also the emotional dysregulation part of it as well, in terms of not being able to process heavy emotions as easily as a neurotypical can. And these both make it so you are really afraid to be judged. And how this shows up specifically, let's say for online coaches or online entrepreneurs who have to show up and share their face and share their voice, is they will experience a lot of resistance to it. They will do everything they can to get out of actually showing up and showing their face and talking. They may show up but feel so nervous and so anxious about it and think everything they said was stupid. And I have to tell you guys, as somebody who has shown up now since January 2018, I have multiple six figures under my belt. I still worry about the fear of judgment. And as I get bigger and bigger, and as more people come to my page or listen to this podcast, I get more and more afraid. So this is something that I still have to work through. So if you are like, wow, I'm going to overcome the fear of judgment and everything is going to be perfect, you're always going to have some kind of fear or worry that somebody is going to judge you. And the reality is not everybody is going to like you, but nobody wants to hear that. Everybody hears that and they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, totally makes sense for you. But for me, I want everybody to like me, and I don't think that is a tall order. That's literally how it works in my brain. It's the same thing with imposter syndrome and being like, everybody else is good enough and capable and worthy, but not me. I know that I'm a fraud. It's the same type of situation where we consciously and logically know that there are going to be people who don't like us or don't like our content or don't agree with us, and that can be really scary because of the fear of rejection. But whether you are neurodivergent or neurotypical, this podcast is good for you to listen to, because I just wanted to share some insight in terms of where that fear of judgment is stemming from a subconscious mind perspective and from a cognitive perspective, okay? And I guess from a somatic perspective as well, right? So firstly, the brain, your little caveman brain. You've heard me talk about it before, that your brain is a lizard brain. It is not very developed from when there were cavemen and when they were worried about being eaten by a tiger. Or is it a saber-toothed lion? No, it's a saber-toothed tiger. So your brain is not very developed. So your fight or flight reactions to danger are going to be the same as they were back then when the threat of danger meant death, but now we are worried more about personal risk and personal danger to our character or to our life. Of course, there are situations where your physical health could be impacted, but for the most part, our fear of conflict or our fear of rejection and all of those things are threat to our character and threat to like who we are. But it's the same chemical reaction, okay? And the fear of rejection is stemming from a fear of not belonging. So when you are afraid to show up and say something that somebody may not like, or when you are just afraid to show up in general because you're afraid that somebody is gonna judge you or think something of it, especially if you're somebody who has like people in your personal life that watch your stories, that can always be hard because it's like you're not gonna block all of them or get them to all unfollow you, especially if they're people who are still in your life and enjoy supporting you, but it can sometimes really hold you back because you're thinking about that risk of judgment. And that comes from a sense of needing to belong. And again, this is something that is like a core need, and that is to belong. And I know you guys have heard me talk about it on the podcast before in terms of needing to belong is such a core need because we want to be a part of a group and we want to be loved, and belonging means that we are loved. This is something that comes up a lot for my clients, not just with their business, but in their personal life as well. It is why some people actually gravitate to hiring their first coach because they feel really alone in their business and they want to feel like they're on the right track and that they're doing the right things and that they can be guided to the right things. And it can be really lonely to be producing content and showing up and not receiving that validation, you know, that immediate gratification that you would get in a different situation or if you thought that you were doing really well. So essentially that fear of judgment is triggered by a need to belong. And if you say something that goes against the grain, if you share an opinion, if you are calling a concept out or even a person out in terms of their opinions, if you're sharing your own unique opinion, there is always the risk of losing your footing in terms of a sense of belonging. And that's why a lot of you fly under the radar in terms of just being like, I'm not really saying anything that is like too special or too big or too polarizing. And we're not saying polarizing things for the sake of saying polarizing things, right? We're not saying stupid things on the internet just to piss people off. We're not doing that. What you're doing is differentiating your voice from somebody else's voice. And how you do that is to share your own unique perspectives, ideas, and opinions. And that more so comes from, I have to say this because it's what I truly believe, instead of I am going to rebuttal this person or I think what this person thinks is stupid, right? So it's a very different energy. But regardless, this all comes back to your own sense of belonging and how comforted and how safe you feel in belonging. And putting yourself out there and showing up can really trigger that. It can really send you back into a tailspin of, I am not going to be safe. You know, the brain just wants you to be safe, right? And in these instances, it's really important to question yourself because your brain is just going to narrow in. It's just going to get really specific and really scared, and it's going to convince you that you are going to die. That's essentially what's happening with the chemicals in your brain. So you have to really question yourself when you get really anxious about showing up, like, what am I afraid of losing? That is a great question for you to ask yourself. What am I afraid of losing here? You can also ask yourself, how am I safe right now? How am I safe? Because the reality is you're going to show up and say words, and the worst that could happen is somebody could say, I don't like that you said that. And what you would have to deal with is the feelings in your body with regards to that and what you would make that mean. Very little of this is catastrophic. And I want to kind of answer this too in terms of like the fear of being canceled. A lot of my clients have come to me with that as well. And your intention is to never do harm. Your intention is to help people and to serve people. And your intention is not to do harm. And truly, depending on how big your audience is, right? Like, there is no such thing as being canceled when you are a good-hearted, true human who has good intentions, and you're not going to get canceled. Okay? Like, I get the fear. I get it. But the people that are getting canceled are the people that are doing things that are not out of great intentions, right? And you have good intentions. You want to serve people. You want to help people. You want to grow your business. You are a good-hearted human. And I just want you to remember that. And that fear is usually because it's exasperated in the media with celebrities and with like really big time people who are probably doing things that they shouldn't be doing or saying because it's harmful. But you are a good person and you have good intentions. So don't worry about being fucking canceled, okay? So again, you're going to want to come back to that. How am I safe? And what am I afraid of losing? So those are two really good questions, and just help your brain feel comforted in the fact that you're not going to lose anything, that you are okay, that you can speak up and speak your truth. And a lot of the time, it's not even that polarizing or anything like that. You're just afraid to be seen. And I do have a podcast episode in there somewhere about being afraid to be seen, because that's being seen for who you truly are, being seen for your own opinions, being seen as the expert that you are stepping into. And that can be really, really scary. So your emotions are so valid, but just know that your brain is thinking that you're going to die. So it is really important for you to come back in and take control of your thoughts and remind yourself that you are safe. And on a somatic level, this is also really important as well, because you could feel it physically. You can feel yourself starting to feel anxious, or your heartbeat is starting to quicken, and you are starting to get really nervous and actually start to move towards safety. But reminding yourself that you are in control, that you are safe, that maybe you just take a couple of deep breaths, and that you are paying attention to your resistance. If you're telling yourself like, oh, I don't really need to show up now, or you're scrolling incessantly when the point of opening the app was to show up on your stories and talk, or if you keep deleting all of your stories, step back, take a big deep breath, and remind yourself that you are safe, that you do belong, that you do have loved ones and people who support you, that you have an audience, even if it's one person that you are influencing that care about what you have to say, and that you are a good human with good intentions, and that you are showing up to help somebody. And remember that it's really important to come back to, I'm saying this to help somebody, and even if it's just one person, if you are able to help one person today, what would you say? If somebody knew that you were the expert in this niche and you showed up and you had something to say and they really needed to hear your words, if they really needed to be comforted by your words, what would you say? And that really takes the focus off of you and how you're being impacted, and more so instead about the client or the potential client, right? But first, we have to think about how are we safe, right? Because we need to feel safe and comforted first, and you are always safe. You are more than safe. And I think that our brains are really good at tricking us into believing that we aren't safe in those moments, but it's just a phone, it's just social media, or it's just a meeting, and it makes sense because you're afraid to be rejected, you're afraid to be criticized, you're afraid to be called out. It makes total sense, and you can tell yourself that it makes sense, especially if you have experiences where you were excluded, or experiences where you did speak up and something happened, or if you were told to not share your opinion, right? But your social media or your space that you are claiming is your sacred space. This is your place to say what's on your mind and to speak your truth, and your people will be there and they will support you, and that they will continue to follow you because they relate to you and they are getting something out of your words, right? Like, as a reminder, even if you have 10 people, even if you just have 10 people watching your stories, they are getting something out of what you're saying. Okay, so as a recap, your brain thinks it's gonna die. As always, your brain is trying to recreate that sense of belonging when it starts to get anxious about the fear of judgment. And it's important for you to remind yourself that you are safe, you are supported, you are loved, and that everything will be okay. So you got to give that comfort to your brain. You also have to give that comfort to your physical self as well. So if you need to breathe, do some EFT tapping, and really remind your brain and remind your body that you are safe in this moment, and that everything that you're afraid of losing in terms of showing up, that's not factual. Those are your feelings. And I didn't really go into like the fear of judgment from like family and friends. However, I've definitely talked about that on the podcast before. It's from 2021, I think around the summertime, if you want to scroll down there. But it's essentially an episode about if they don't understand your business or understand what you're doing. And that also comes back to you're afraid that they're not going to love you anymore, and that you don't need their understanding. You just need their love, right? And the same thing goes for if there are friends watching your stories or people who you know that you know aren't ever going to pay you, but they're paying attention to what you're doing. Remember, you don't need their opinion anyways because they're never going to pay you. And essentially, it is just the fear of losing their love and support. But people don't need to understand you to respect you. They don't need to understand you to love you, okay? And you have a bunch of people who really need what you have to offer, and they need your unique voice. They need your unique gift and how you can help them specifically with your experience and your story. And you can't do that if you hide from the world. You can't do that if you tell yourself nobody wants to hear this or somebody's gonna criticize me or call me out. Then you are actually withdrawing your gift and withdrawing your words from somebody who really needs it. And as a reminder, I have one-to-one coaching spots open, and this is for the online coach who is potentially neurodivergent and high achieving that wants to work on that wound around achievement-based worth, who wants to overcome imposter syndrome and reduce your I'm not good enough thought spirals that are stopping you from showing up, that are stopping you from being consistent, that are really affecting your ability to put yourself out there in the world and be fully seen as the expert that you are. And you can go to the link in my show notes and apply. This is a 6-month one-to-one coaching program with weekly calls, and I can't wait to talk to you. Okay, so I love you guys so much. I will see you next week. Bye. Thanks for listening to the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. Head to the show notes to find out how you can take this work deeper with me in one-to-one coaching or in my lifetime group coaching program, The Worthy Woman Method. In the show notes, you'll also find a free 3-day challenge to start the process of overcoming your inner imposter. And once you're done with that, screenshot this episode and share it on Instagram, tagging me at YourCoachJill so we can connect. See you next time.